weather outside. Thank y'all very much. It is great to be back here in Iowa. I want to thank our host for allowing us to be here as well. This is one of those companies, by the way, the president says that this family didn't build. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. It is great to be here. You know, how many times, don't worry about that, we'll keep talking. We live in a state, we get hurricanes. We're used to the power going out. Don't worry about it. If you'll stick with me, I'll stick with you. But you know, how many times have we heard elected officials say this is the most important election of our lifetimes? We hear it so often, it just becomes so much of a cliche. It is actually true this November. Now, why do I say that? Why is this election so important? You know, the reality is, and I want to say this, and I mean this, I think the president is a good man. I think he is a good husband. He is a good father from all outward appearances. He's a good family man. And I think he's trying his best as president. I just don't think his best is good enough for these United States of America. Now, I've really only got two concerns with this president. One is the fact that he is the most liberal president since Jimmy Carter was in the White House. My second concern with him is that he's the most incompetent president since Jimmy Carter was in the White House. And I don't mean any disrespect to Jimmy Carter by saying that. But let me share with you, other than those two things, I like him just fine. But let me share with you why I think that's so and why I think it is so important we elect Governor Romney this fall. Let me start with the incompetence. You know, let's listen to the president's own words. 4 years ago, he said that if we don't turn this economy around in 3.5 years, it'd be a one-term proposition. 2 years ago, former President Clinton said, look, give us 2 more years, we don't get this turned around, kick us out of office. The president's broken a lot of promises. That's one promise I'd actually like him to keep and make this a one-term presidency. Let's look at his record. He said, pass that stimulus bill, give them $800 billion to spend, and they'd keep unemployment below 8%. Unemployment then went above 8% and stayed there for 41 months and counting. And there are a lot of ways of looking at the impact of this economy on our country. 23 million underemployed, unemployed Americans. I do have 3 young kids. If your kids, your grandchildren are a little bit older, coming out of college, 50% of them, nearly half of them, are going to be unemployed or underemployed if they're coming out of school this year. You look at family income, net family income, you look at median family income across this country, it's down $4,000. You look at net family worth, median household worth at a 2-decade low since this president took office. You look at those with mortgages on their homes, 30% of them are underwater. The list goes on and on and on in terms of how bad this economy is doing, even here in Iowa. Now, Iowa's doing better than the rest of the country. You've got a great Republican governor. Terry's doing a great job. Let's give him a great round of applause. Even before this drought, here in Iowa, thanks to this president's policies, 11,000 fewer Iowans working than the first day he took office. Median family income here in Iowa has gone down over $1,000 on average since this president took office. So the reality is his policies have been bad for Iowa, they've been bad for America. What was this president's response? More taxes, more borrowing, more spending. You remember this was a president who told us, I'm going to cut the debt in half by the end of my first term. He has since then borrowed $1 trillion every single year that he has been president. My little girl came home from school. She's all of 10 years old. She had a button on that said, please don't tell the president what comes after $1 trillion. And you know, there are a lot of ways of measuring that debt. This president, in the face of bankruptcy, created a new entitlement program costing $1.76 trillion when we can't afford the programs we've got today. But here's just one, there are all kinds of numbers. One quick anecdote about this debt. A few weeks ago, the president was trying to tell Europe how they needed to fix their economy. He was worried their economy was going to hurt his re-election chances in our economy. The German foreign minister had something interesting to say. He basically told the American president, we don't need you to lecture us. He said, why don't you clean up your own house before you start to tell us what to do? Because you see, as bad as things are in Europe, and they're pretty bad, when you look at the countries that are covered by the Eurozone, their debt, their government debt is about 80% of GDP. Here in America, we're at 100% of GDP. Look, you know things are bad. When the Europeans are telling us, you're spending and borrowing too much, you know things are bad when we've gotten that low. I wrote this in a blog. It's kind of like when the town drunk tells you you've got a drinking problem. Guys, it's not good when the Europeans are telling us you Americans are spending and borrowing too much. But let's look at that new entitlement program that he created. He made some promises about that as well. Remember, he promised if you like your doctor, you like your health plan, you can keep it. Except that it wasn't true. CBO says over 20 million Americans may lose their employer-provided health plan. Remember, he told us, I'm going to protect Medicare. Except that wasn't true either. $500 billion in cuts to Medicare. CMS's own actuary says that's not sustainable, not realistic. Said he wasn't going to raise our taxes. Not true either. He's going to raise over $500 billion in taxes. Said he was going to cut our health care premiums by $2,500 per year. Turns out that's not true either. Turns out health care premiums went up 9% last year. The government's own actuaries said health care spending will grow faster than if Obamacare wasn't the law in 2014. Over 2 percentage points faster health care growth than if that wasn't the law. The list goes on and on and on in terms of broken promises that he made before he passed this law. It is a law we can't afford. $1.76 trillion. The costs are only going to get higher, and it still leaves over 25 million Americans, 25 million individuals uninsured in our country. The bottom line is we need to repeal and replace that law. Now, I can keep talking about all the broken promises and things he said he was going to do versus what he's actually done, but I think I've made the case this has been one of the most incompetent administrations we have seen in 4 years, in these last 4 years that we have seen since Jimmy Carter, and I compared that to Governor Romney. When he was the governor of Massachusetts, their unemployment was below the national average. Per capita income grew faster than the national average. Their unemployment rate was below 5%. They were actually one of the top 10 states when it comes to turning around their economy. They were losing jobs when he was elected governor. They were gaining jobs when he left. They were doing better when he was governor than they did before and after he was there. He inherited a $3 billion budget mess. He fixed it without raising taxes, put $2 billion in the rainy day fund. Now, you're going to hear all kinds of distortions, attacks, and lies on Governor Romney's record. You've already heard them. You've already seen ads filled with lies that fact-checking organizations said simply weren't true. Why is that? Well, look, the president and his team, they can't run on his record. They can't run on his campaign promises, so they've got to distort. They've gone after what Governor Romney did as governor in the private sector, even what he did in high school. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty happy. We're not talking about what I did in high school. That's not the subject of this election. So put aside the incompetence. I'm going to spend a few minutes with you talking to you about why I think this has been the most liberal president since Jimmy Carter. Because you see, this election really is about competence and growing the economy and putting our people back to work, but it's also about the future direction of this country. There are really two very different perspectives at running for election this November. The first, the president's perspective. I kind of label this the Occupy Wall Street perspective. He got in trouble a few weeks ago. You remember he said, well, if you have a business, you didn't build that. Basically saying somebody else was responsible for our success. And his aides came out and said, well, that's not really what he meant. A few weeks ago, before that, he said, you know, the private sector is doing just fine. It's the public sector we have to worry about. His aides came out and said, well, he didn't really mean that either. But this is a pattern. You know, 4 years ago in California, he said behind closed doors, Americans were clinging to their guns and religion. Before his aides had to come out and say, well, he didn't really mean that either. I will say, coming from the great state of Louisiana, we're proud to be clinging to our guns and religion. We may go on. I think that was meant to be an insult, but we didn't take it as an insult back home anyway. You know, he keeps saying these things, and his aides keep coming out and saying, well, he doesn't really mean that. When you look at his policies, it's been one of the most divisive administrations, trying to divide us by class, trying to divide us by age, geography, whatever helps them win an election, trying to demonize those that have been successful, trying to raise taxes on 900,000 small business owners just to make a political point. You know, there is this Occupy Wall Street mentality that demonizes those that have been successful, that wants to make us more like Europe, that wants to just slow our economic growth with more taxes, more government spending. But there's a different view, different vision for America as well. Governor Romney understands here in America, you're not entitled to your neighbor's property. You're not entitled to your neighbor's home or car. Nobody promises you equal outcomes in this great country. What we do promise in America is equal opportunity. And that's very different. What we promise is, if you're willing to work hard, get a great education, there's no limit to what you can accomplish in this great country. I want you to think about that. Because every generation of Americans has left more opportunities for our children and our grandchildren than we inherited from our parents. That's the American dream, that our kids will do better than we have done. You know what's so great about America? It really doesn't matter your zip code where you were born. It doesn't matter your last name. It doesn't matter your race, your gender. No, you don't have to have the right last name to be successful in this country. That doesn't determine your outcome as an adult in this great country. If you're willing to work hard and get an education, you can do extremely well. The reason I know that, and the reason you know that, is every one of us has a story to tell. Maybe it was your parents. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's your grandparents. Maybe it was somebody in your family. But every one of us has somebody in our family. For us, it was my dad. My dad's 1 of 9. First and only one that got past the 5th grade in our family. And he worked hard so that his kids could have more opportunities than he had. Everybody here has got a story exactly like that. That's the American dream. And that's what's at stake in this election. The reason I'm up here, and the reason I'm campaigning so hard, is I've got 3 young children. I want them to have a brighter future. I want them to have more opportunities than we inherit. And I worry. I worry at $15 trillion and counting dollars of debt. We are mortgaging their future. Your children's future, your grandchildren's future. Now I'm going to make a couple of predictions for you before I close. This election is a very close election. Iowa's a very important state. Now y'all are used to getting a lot of attention in the primaries. But y'all are getting a lot of attention in this general election as well. You're one of a handful of swing states in a very close election. You're going to get all kinds of candidate visits, all kinds of campaign commercials, and you'll have to tell us what that's like. In Louisiana, we don't get all that attention. But this is a very important election. And it's going to be a close election. And the closer it gets, the more negative the president and his team is going to be. And they're going to try to distract us, and they're going to try to talk about everything but what's most important in this election. He can't run on his record. He can't run on his promises, can't run on his platform, so he's got to tear down Governor Romney. So the first thing I want to say to you is this is an important election. I appreciate your being out here. And I just ask you to talk to your neighbors, your friends, your family members. Tell them why this election is so important. Why they have to vote, why they have to show up. It's not just about us. It's about our children and our grandchildren. And I'll close with this. I've shared a lot of challenges facing us as a country, but I will tell you this. In my bones, I know we are blessed to live in the greatest country in the history of the world. I've got no doubt our best days are ahead of us, not behind us. There are a lot of academics, a lot of opinion makers, a lot of experts that would try to tell you this century belongs to China. I think it's a lot of nonsense. I think on a level playing field, we can compete with anybody in the world. And I think we've got the best people, and I think we can have the best economy with the right policies in Washington, D.C. It starts with making sure that President Obama is a one-term president. It starts by putting Mitt Romney in the White House. It starts by putting our country back on the right track. Thank y'all for coming out today. God bless you.